So it's called PREZOD, Prevention of Zoonotic Disease Emergence. It's an international One Health initiative, and it's led mainly by science. So it was launched in the peak of COVID 3 years ago, in January 2021, by the French government, by President Macron, during the One Planet Summit, and he received right away support for the European Commission, support for the quadripartite organization, WHO, FAO, UNEP, and also the World Organization for Animal Health. And today, a little bit 3 years after, we have more than 240 members. It's important to mention that it's really wide expertise coming from different sectors. So we have 26 countries, governments, members of PREZOD. Belgium government is very active and also created the PREZOD Belgium, very active group, plus more than 215 other members, stakeholders coming from really different sectors, from research institutes, from academia, from NGOs, civil societies, industry, and really bring together expertise from all over the world, from more than 77 countries that have interest in the field of emergence of zoonotic diseases, and it's also working on different levels. So the ambition is quite high. It's to really create a research framework to understand the macro processes and drivers leading zoonotic emergence in the context of the global change. This was discussed today many times, gave a lot of examples of loss of biodiversity, deforestation, climate change. So it's really create mechanism that's changing, and we need to understand the spillover of pathogens from animals to human. This will require an international and multi-sectorial collaboration to study the ecology, the evolutionary history of pathogen and host, the social economic, the social environmental mechanism that bring animals and humans close together. And the idea is to promote co-design strategies to reducing the risk, especially in frontline communities. So how we hope to achieve it through this three mechanisms. So to create a common framework to implement and coordinate research projects, surveillance system, and operational projects to maximize the impact. We already started to create a platform for data sharing, and we want also to create a resource for centers for decision makers. So in a way, translating the research to a language to facilitate it, the understanding of policymakers when they take decisions, so it will be based on science. The first 2 years of the initiative were focused very much on a lot of collaboration from all over the world with 1,500 experts to create the strategic agenda coming from 120 countries around the world. And this is our strategic agenda, that now we are moving from the phase more raising awareness about this initiative to more operational phase. And we are going to study these 5 pillars. So the first one is understanding zoonotic risk and risk activities. The second one, to co-design solutions. The third one, to strengthen early warning system and detect zoonotic risk. We will try also to create a prototype of a global information system for surveillance, mainly in communities in the front lines. And the fifth one, which is cross-cutting, is One Health. It's really engage stakeholders and to co-design One Health networks, solutions, and policies. The French government, together with launching this initiative, also provided the first funding. I will not go into the details, just to let you know that already some projects are launched and are in the field in 10 different countries around the world, in South America, in Africa, and in Southeast Asia. A new second part of another project is the PPA PREZOD, which will be launched, is launched now this year, also with 30 million. So, and all other activities that will be also come together in the coming months and years. To close just the initiative, we are working in partnership with different stakeholders, but at the global level, we're working with the WHO. We have a working group on preventing future pandemics. We have another working group with FAO on investment, the return on investment of One Health prevention prevention, and we are also now negotiating with the World Organization for Animal Health to have another working group on One Health governance and policies. I'm closing here. If you have an interest, please contact me. I will give you more information about the pre-zone and activities, about membership. The membership is free. We are really encouraging everyone to come, to be part of our activities, and to provide expertise, working together, combining all the expertise that exists on so different levels from all over the world will help us to hopefully achieve the goals of the initiative. Thank you very much for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, I seem to be just in time. So many thanks for this warm welcome. But first of all, I would like to thank you all for coming here from all over Europe. I know some of you had a long journey, so I should praise your dedication to European collaboration and the spirit of European collaboration. Let me first give a very short overview of the priorities we've set as a Belgian presidency of the Council of the EU, the priorities we've set for these 6 months of presidency. And as a matter of fact, these 6 months where we hold the presidency, they come at a very special moment because that is the end of a legislature of 5 years, and it's the beginning of a new legislature of 5 years, so it's a kind of a critical juncture. And so our idea was that we should really take this as an opportunity to contribute to the EU's health agenda for the next 5 years, and also to set relatively high ambitions for this health agenda. We've been focusing on 3 major health themes with a slogan, in a sense, 3 buzzwords we've been repeating. We said that we were arguing for a Europe that cares and that is seen to care by citizens, a Europe that prepares and a Europe that protects. First, we need a Europe that cares, and that's the reason why we put shortages of health workforce on the agenda, disease prevention, also the adequate identification of priority unmet medical needs and the ways and means to incentivize research towards priority unmet medical needs. Next to a Europe that cares, we said we also need a Europe that prepares for future health crises in a world, I don't need to tell you that is becoming ever more dangerous and unpredictable. And so we want to further strengthen the cooperation between different government levels and departments involved in preparedness and crisis management. And we've also put the development of a clinical trials coordination mechanism on the table. And we have continued the work on AMR, which I will discuss in a minute. Next to care, prepare, the third and final pillar of our Belgian presidency is a Europe that protects, and protects against medicine shortages and dangerous dependencies in pharmaceutical supply chain. I guess you know the numbers, but let me repeat them because they are really worrying. 1/4 of generic medicines were withdrawn from the European market in the past 10 years. For some product classes like oncology medicines, the number runs up to 40% of withdrawals. And we know that for some critical products and medicines, the world depends on 1 or 2 countries and producers globally. For instance, 80 to 90% of the global supply of antibiotics comes from China. That is not a situation we want to stay in. And therefore, we work together with the European Commission and with the European Medicines Agency on a plan to better manage, also better mitigate shortages and dependencies. As a short-term measure, we have established a voluntary solidarity mechanism to exchange medicines between member states. Sometimes you have one member state where there is a shortage, whilst in another member state there is a surplus that can be used of the same drug. As a long-term measure, we have established a Critical Medicines Alliance, which is a partnership between government, industry, and patient and professional organizations, a partnership to develop tangible solutions to weaknesses in our supply chain. And we hope that this alliance, which is now up and running, will eventually lead to a Critical Medicines Act that is a legal framework that should enable a battery of measures to tackle the problem of shortages and vulnerabilities in a structural way. But let me return to preparedness, which is the topic of discussion today. We decided, not surprisingly, I think, to focus on two pandemics. First, the silent pandemic, which is caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and then, obviously, the lessons we can draw from the COVID experience. This silent AMR pandemic has exercised many people for a long time, including myself. In fact, I had the privilege of being Minister of Social Affairs and Healthcare between 1999 and 2003, and we then also had a EU presidency. And we've, at that very moment, put AMR on the agenda. This resulted in the adoption of the Council recommendation for the prudent use of antibiotics in human medicine in November 2001. We started supporting financially the first national educational campaigns on adequate use of antibiotics. They have been repeated annually since. And I think it's fair to say that that led to an important, maybe even a dramatic reduction of antibiotic prescription in primary care in this country. But obviously, a lot remains to be done. And so last week, this Belgian presidency organized a conference to discuss the EU's AMR governance, the implementation of effective, results-driven policy measures to optimize the use of antibiotics, the question how to stimulate the R&D on new antibiotics, but also how to have sustainable access to existing ones. I followed last week the panel discussion we organized in that conference on push and pull incentives for R&D and to bring antibiotics on the market. And I should say I was really struck by the collaborative spirit between the stakeholders. These stakeholders have been working together for more than a decade, and although they have competing and often conflicting interests, I think they all share the same basic value, which is we have to fight that silent pandemic in the interest of patients and the health systems overall. This work continues during this conference, with the sessions on One Health and AMR, and the role European partnerships can play to align the research and innovation agendas in this regard. I think that is all very important work, and so I'm grateful to the organizers and the people in this room for bringing this agenda forward. The EU initiatives to fight antibiotic resistance are, I think, a beautiful example of the great benefits that can be brought to people through collaboration among European countries. It's fair to say, I think, that these collaborations would simply not have taken place without the EU. And so we hope that last week's AMR event, together with this conference, will further reinforce the EU's response to prevention and control of antimicrobial resistance. Let me then return to the other pandemic, which is COVID-19. And there is a famous saying, you'll know it, by Winston Churchill, who said, "Never let a good crisis to waste." And indeed, if we look at the history of the EU, significant progress was made, but mostly after a serious crisis also here. During the COVID pandemic, we obviously observed that there was a lack of sufficient and well-defined competencies. There was a lack of adequately coordinated institutions and governance at the EU level. In the beginning, there was a painful lack of solidarity among member states. There was a lack of availability of well-tested response plans, both at the national and the pan-European level. But gradually, there was more coherence in the action and real solidarity in the action. And so I'm very pleased that Belgium is the first country in the EU that will now be assessed this week by ECDC regarding our national outbreak response planning. That is what should be done. As a presidency, we are supplementing this national work also by putting a focus on the crisis governance at EU level. We organized several high-level meetings and workshops, and we also commissioned a paper on the landscape that's being created at EU level during and after the pandemic to improve our response capacity. We organized an assessment on that landscape by a Brussels-based think tank, the Center for European Policy Studies, which is a relatively critical assessment, but I think it's fair. If you ask me, are we now prepared? I would say our preparation is better, but we cannot say that we are really prepared. And we need some ordering of the landscape, the procedures and the rules of each and everybody. We also noticed that an unprecedented number of academic clinical trials have been launched by member states, but despite these efforts, a lack of coordination across member states resulted in a chaotic landscape with numerous underpowered clinical trials that could not provide meaningful results, as well as duplication of research activities. Here again, I think the message is clear. Collective action by member states is essential to really serve European citizens against future health threats in an efficient way. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, policymakers were, for instance, confronted with the question whether COVID patients should be treated with hydroxychloroquine. Because of the media attention, they were under pressure to agree with the use of this drug based on some smaller, low-quality studies with surprisingly spectacular results. I think media attention cannot be avoided. That's the game that is played today. It's inescapable. However, I think we all would have welcomed rapid results from high-quality, preferentially randomized trials about the clinical effectiveness of this drug and also of its side effects. In this case, precious time was lost since no evidence was produced due to the uncontrolled use outside of good clinical trials. And that is why we need to urgently develop a mechanism for much better and much faster clinical trials during future pandemics. We therefore decided that during our EU presidency, we will work on the development of tangible action for strengthening the European ecosystem for public clinical trial platforms. One of the very important actions is the better coordination of public funding between national funders of clinical trials. Indeed, I think we should not blame member states for a lack of coordination if there is no mechanism, if there is no platform for such collaboration. I'm therefore extremely pleased that we are now building such a mechanism by bringing together the different stakeholders. Flanders and DG RTD have been busy setting up a European partnership on pandemic preparedness, which includes a network of ever-warm clinical trials. At the same time, the European Medicines Agency and DG HERE have published the terms of reference for an actual coordinating group. And that group should advise on clinical trials and their funding in order to prioritize the most promising medicinal products and clinical studies for implementation in the EU to ensure indeed optimal preparedness and response in the case of public health emergencies. Ladies and gentlemen, as Jeremy Bentham once wisely observed, the rarest of all human qualities is consistency. And I think we should have that mantra in mind when we think also about the EU agenda and the EU action. In a world that is getting more complicated and uncertain by the day, we have to keep the health and well-being of EU citizens front and center stage, and this means that the EU should really have a persistent, ambitious, and well-organized health agenda. That is indeed what we want to see as a result of our presidency. I would like to conclude by thanking you all wholeheartedly. We will not be able to accomplish the goals of our presidency without your help and support, and we are very grateful for that. And I hope that when one day we may be looking back at this presidency, that we will be able to conclude that the 2024 presidency was a mark, even maybe a milestone, in the EU's preparedness and response to health crisis. So thank you for the work you've all contributed. Thank you for taking time to attend this conference. I wish you a very nice evening and many more fruitful discussions tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So it's a difficult exercise for me to summarize the discussion we had this morning with the group up. No, yeah. So with the group on how to build and how to run a clinical trial network, which is a very embarrassing question. So there were two individual panel discussions. The first one was how to build a network, and how to build a network refers to a series of burning questions. The first one is that there is a need to start with a mapping exercise, and this mapping exercise cannot easily be done at the pan-European level, and for this reason there is need to involve the national level and to ask the member country to perform this overview to understand really what is going on in different countries, to avoid duplication and overlap, and also to avoid the gaps. The second one is to take advantage of the EU patient recruitment capacity and to work at scale. For instance, to be able to decide whether or not it makes sense to run multinational clinical trials, meaning running multinational clinical trials in Europe is not so easy. It's even extremely difficult, and the higher the number of countries, the higher the level of complexity. So in some cases, it's better to decide to run the trial at national level, and this has to be taken into account in the decision to create these platform trials. The third point is a selection of investigation site and network, meaning that there were a lot of discussion on what should be the quality label, not being too stringent, because in this case, the cost of accreditation would be something not affordable at all, but keeping a certain level of quality. Develop capacity in the investigation site, and this could be done, for instance, in the pandemic preparedness partnership, and avoid the overlap. For instance, the overlap between the different networks. It's better to make sure that one single site is not involved in more than one trial, because there is a source of competition or even of conflict. Another aspect is the sponsor. So the sponsor is very important in the network. So it is the reason why the network is not just an investigation network, but it has to be taken into account as an ecosystem. But the development of the sponsor capacity is very important, because being sponsor for investigator-initiated clinical trials in one country is not an easy task. But if it is for platform trial with intervention arm coming from the industry and coming from the academia and run at multinational level, is a very, very complex task. And another point is the interest of the industry for this even warm trial site, and for the trial also, because you know that now the industry is a bit reluctant to use the platform trial. The industry prefers to keep business as usual and to work with commercial CROs, but at a given time point, maybe they will be convinced and be able to run trial using this ever warm networks. And then we have also to take into account the objective of the platform trial, because some platform trials have an objective of testing treatment, innovative treatment or repurposed treatment, and this has an impact not only on the master protocol but also on the trial site. Some trial site may be also better adapted for prevention study, including, of course, vaccines. So, of course, it's not really the same organization, or for the non-pharmacological intervention. So this was the discussion in the first sub-panel. And in the second sub-panel, we had a discussion on how to run the network, not how to create the network, but how to run the network. So the first question was a series of questions about the economic model, meaning that this is something we have to solve. There are two main models, meaning the first one is model where there is a sustainable long-term funding and then fees charged for each intervention arm, be it funded through public money or through private money. And the second model is a model where there is a startup funding, meaning to fund the master protocol and the first intervention arm and the control, and then to leave the funding open to the newcomers, to the new intervention arm, and each intervention arm would charge an overhead to maintain the infrastructure. So this is challenging because here there is no security regarding the sustainability of the funding, and the overhead may be different for the industry and the academic arms. The second point is the governance. In terms of governance, there are three important steps. The first one is a decision to create and to decommission the platform, to terminate the platform, and this is really a top-down, very political decision, and this should be based on very careful analysis of the existing organization or trial or platform and so on, but also on the needs, and the needs could be the needs from the industry, from academia, from HTA and so on. The second point is master protocol design and the endpoints, and here we really need input from the regulators, from the EMA, but also from the HTA, because they are the one who will use the data for marketing authorization or for reimbursement decision. And the third one is the issue of the intervention arms, and we're just discussing with our friends from ERA and the partnership and the EMA to discuss who should establish priorities with regard to the intervention arm. Then another bullet point on the management, there is a need, and this was expressed during the discussion, there is a need to professionalize the platform management, and this is a matter of structuring the sponsor capacity. Again, I think the sponsor plays a very important role. The infrastructure, like for instance, ECRIN is in charge of supporting not the investigator, but the sponsor in clinical trials, in multinational clinical trials, and it's a matter of training. Another point is the patient, and the patient, I think it's important not to forget the possible role of patient. I know that in the field of COVID, for instance, the patient association were not ready, of course, when the COVID outbreak started, but I think we should benefit from involving more the patient in the design, in the establishment of the platform trial, and in the development of the protocol and the selection of the endpoints. The infrastructures and the sponsors should be embedded in this ecosystem. So I think we have to maybe forget the word infrastructure, the word investigation network, but really focus on the ecosystem, because the ecosystem is not only the network of investigation sites, but also the sponsor and the patients. And we mentioned also the regulatory hurdle that were addressed during the meeting this morning, but there are still very prominent regulatory hurdle that makes Europe not very attractive for platform trial. There were, for instance, a recent review of the platform trial in the world that was performed by our colleagues in Basel, and it turned out that Europe is lagging behind the US and behind the UK in terms of number of platform trials. So this shows that it is not easy to run platform trial for the time being in Europe. And there were also some questions regarding the inter-pandemic activity. So what is the minimal activity threshold before we decide to terminate a platform trial? So this is an open question. We didn't have an answer, but this is important to consider. And also we have to consider that when there is no new drug to be developed in a given indication, the platform trial can be used to address questions that correspond to comparative effectiveness research or optimization, comparing two doses of treatment that is already approved, and this is important. And we have also to test the industry interest for such comparative effectiveness trial. I know that it is not the main activity of the industry, but sometimes they want to optimize the use of drugs that they market. Thank you for your attention.